Hi, this is Afsheen, conference producer for Africa Agri Expo 2023, one of the largest agriculture related event in Africa. Today joining me is Avinash Kasinathan. He is currently the CEO of Sensa, which is a WayCool enterprise, a tech-focused brand providing solutions across agri-food supply chain. Avinash comes with more than 9 years of rich experience in strategy, technology, and management consulting. He joined WayCool in 2018 as the Chief Strategy and Technology Officer. I am very excited and honored to have the opportunity to interview today, Avinash.
Thanks a lot, Afshin. Pleasure is mine as well.
Thank you. So Avinash, having a strong tech background and knowing agri-food industry so close because you have been working in India and other places widely, how is agtech transforming food ecosystem globally, and what are the biggest challenges according to you in agtech?
Sure. I think over a period of, several years now, in fact, more than a decade, we've been speaking globally about impact around climate change, impact around food security, and so on as well, right? But I think while some of it was a little bit more distant to the common man a few years back, but I think it's becoming a lot more visible. Everybody is seeing the changes from a climatic perspective. Food security in various countries is becoming more and more a real problem, and a lot of investment is going into that as well. Now, and if I want to double click in terms of how do you solve for food security, right? I think there are two, three different levers through which you can look at it, right? And each of these levers has a different aspect of how agri tech and technology in the agri and food space can really come in. The first is, of course, in terms of what do you do at the farm itself? How do you improve? How do you plan your cultivation, improve your yields? What are the best packages or practices? How do you smartly utilize the resources, etc.? And I think that's an area where there has been a lot of innovations and a lot of focus from different players, both niche and large scale players in this area. But I think equally important are two other areas, right? Which is my second and the third point. It's the second one is in terms of for the food that we produce, are we consuming all of it, right? And the reality is that in many countries, including something like India, there is enough food, at least today, which is being produced, which is enough for the consumption of the country. But what happens is more than 30% of the food gets wasted in the supply chain because it's fragmented, unorganized. The supply doesn't know when and where the demand is, and so on as well, right? And this is something which we cannot afford to live with, right? I mean, the food which is wasted in India is equal to the food which is consumed in Brazil. And these are not numbers which are specific to India alone, but true of most countries, whether it's the emerging nations or the developed nations as well. So, how do you bring in technology into the food and agri supply chain itself to ensure that all the ecosystem players, whether it's the farmers, the processing, warehousing players, whether it's on the distribution and the retail network, and the consumers are all on one platform, and decisions are therefore made to optimally produce where and what is needed for consumption. So it's the need is for the supply chain itself to be a lot more demand driven rather than supply driven, and that's where the technology will play a critical role as well. And third, which is something which we have to start thinking about a lot more, and is in terms of are there consumer behaviors which we can study in more depth from in terms of understanding of taste, nutrition, etc., and can we provide alternate foods which are more sustainable, less consuming of resources, less on food miles, more optimal supply chains which is more environment friendly, etc., and therefore be able to change the supply chain footprint itself for those products, and therefore make food availability more sustainable as well, right? I mean, we've seen some beginnings on this, which is also picking up in many countries in terms of alternate meats to regular meats and so on. But that's just still scratching the surface, right? I think even within vegetarian foods as well, right? I mean, you can have some other alternative foods which will have a similar taste, similar nutritious value, etc., which may be more available closer to you, right? Have we understood consumer behaviors enough to be able to tackle that? And I think that's an interesting area where using the technology in the first two layers elements, which is on growing as well as in supply chain understanding is where you should take the next step in terms of deriving insights and altering the supply chain to some extent to make it more sustainable.
Absolutely. I think first understanding what is the basic is
Sorry, Afshin, I am losing your voice a bit.
okay. So, can
Yeah,
you
it's
hear
better
me?
now.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. So I was saying that it is very important in order to derive solutions for a certain thing, we need to understand what the challenge is or what the problem is, where the problem lies. So I think you correctly said that producing is a different thing, but food wastage is currently a major issue that needs to be addressed. So which brings me to my next question that as a WayCool enterprise, I'm talking about Sensa, tell us what Sensa is and what solutions does it offer to the agro-food supply chain as you were talking about.
Sure. Sure. So Sensa was built as a technical arm within WayCool itself to serve WayCool's purpose of reimagining India's supply chain to primarily solve around the second lever which I spoke about, which was around the wastage of food. Right. I think WayCool set out to tackle this problem. I mean, when in India you have up to 30% wastage within WayCool due to the revised, I mean, alternative business models along with the technology, we've managed to bring this down to less than 2 to 4% of wastage. So it's significantly lower levels. And to be able to do that, it required not just business model fixes and operational discipline, but technology being built across the entire ecosystem of players. So we had to have technology across six major groups. One is on the farmers, of course. Second is your processing and milling and manufacturing ecosystem, which basically converts the form of the food. Third is around warehousing and storage units and enterprises. Fourth is around the whole distribution network, whether it's around logistics, whether it's around the sales itself, and so on. Fifth is the retailer ecosystem, because and the retailer ecosystem is very important that in most countries it's not necessarily the large supermarkets which cater to the majority of the audience, but it's going to be smaller mom and pop stores, kirana stores, etc., which is in India that is about 80%, and I believe the trends in most of the countries is very similar. And sixth is, of course, the consumer itself. Right? And our strong belief and thesis has been that unless all these six players are on one unified platform and are talking to each other through the platform itself, you're not going to be making decisions which is optimal from a overall supply chain perspective. Right? Otherwise, we would be suffering from what is typically in supply chain known as a bullwhip effect, where you only understand what is happening one step ahead of you, and the choices you make therefore will have lags, it will have issues, and that is something which you cannot afford to in perishable produce, in volatile produce, etc. So that was the birth of Sensa. So Sensa aimed to build the first fully operating system across all these six parts of the ecosystem globally, and we built it. We're successful with WayCool, as you can see. Been able to be extremely responsive to serving the customer and the consumer needs, much higher than the benchmarks, but at the same time being managing this at a wastage of less than 2 to 4%. So then we realized that this is something which, while it works for for WayCool and India's supply chain dynamics, most of it is common with little configurations and little modifications to majority of the countries across the globe. Many of the countries have small farm holdings. Many of the countries have small retailers who provide the supplies to the or the groceries to the end consumers like you and me. And many of these again have multiple fragmented players in the middle of the ecosystem as well. Right. So to be able to really therefore I think what Sensor built for WayCool in India is equally applicable for the rest of the globe as well. And that's why it's been spun off as a full-fledged tech subsidiary of WayCool itself to exactly serve this purpose.
Correct. So, Avinash, because you mentioned that there are six steps in the whole ecosystem, major steps in the ecosystem. So, how do you ensure that the services, the technologies that Sensa provides are utilized by the companies and most importantly, the first step of the ecosystem, which are the farmers. How do you ensure that?
Yeah, I think what is important is like any technology which is built, understanding the both the business and the users itself. I think one advantage which Sensa has from any other pure technology players is it's been built by practitioners, right? I mean, it's been built where we sit literally across along with all of these ecosystem partners. We've had access to more than 200,000 farmers, 125,000 customers, and about several thousands of players in the other parts of the ecosystem as well. So there has been very, very specific learnings, whether it's around the process itself, whether it's around controls, it's around governances, etc., which are nuanced and very specific to the agri and food space. And most of these controls and governances are again not very India specific. It is relevant to food all over the world because it is perishable. Food is perishable irrespective of which part of the world you are in, and many of these becomes equally relevant that way. So what helps us is our understanding basis WayCool's own success story, which is what we use with clients to help them understand how the various controls and governances which is built into our technology is going to help them with a smooth, frictionless supply chain process. What we have also ensured from a technical perspective is that these solutions are modular and at the same time configurable and integratable with any accounting systems, ERP systems, which different organizations may have. So structurally, there is not much of a change in the technical ecosystem which different players have to do. Our food operating system under Sensa can be plugged into that, and depending on which parts of these of the six part elements of the supply chain the different companies play in, they can accordingly take up only those modules, and it will still function well to that extent. Equally important is the question which you raised, Afsheen, about farmers. I think that's farmers require trust building as well. I think digital literacy is something which people talk about, but it's something you can um, build, right? I mean, many countries farmers still use WhatsApp, they still watch videos on phones and all of that. So I think communication and ability to learn is not necessarily a major roadblock. What is most important is that the farmer should trust and value the what the technology brings to them, right? And I think in India and WayCool have been able to achieve that because after a couple of years when they worked with the ecosystem itself, right? And they've been able to understand that, and those case studies is what we continue to take to the farmers. But there are fundamental elements of the value proposition to the farmers from what we have. We don't focus only on how do they improve their current crop yield or what are the best prices they can get at it. We look at it from a lot more holistic view in terms of advisory, in terms of how can they get the best P&L not just for this year but over several years, which means basis the soil conditions, basis the water in your region, and basis the demand which is required at different points. We literally help build the crop cultivation calendar for the farmers. So they know that exactly this is what needs to be grown at every literally quarter of an acre so that the harvest can happen accordingly in line with the demand, and that you can also have multiple rotations of crops. I mean, there are several farmers whom we have converted from one crop per year to two to three crops within the same year without having any effect on the soil and the nutrients, because of again just the awareness building in terms of how to best match the supply the demands, and at the same time be mindful of the soil and the nutrient conditions there itself. So as farmers start using these practices, as they start seeing their P&L build, that's how they see the value, and they start using it more. And within the farmer community, it's a very strong community anywhere in the world. Once the first set of farmers have piloted and understood the value, they keep learning from each other, and then the solutions keep picking up.
Absolutely. I would like to point out three things here, Avinash, from the discussion we had in the past questions is that it is a very impressive number when you say that with your past experiences and improvising on the yields, you have reduced the food loss from 30% to 3 to 4%. That's a huge number. Congratulations for that. Second thing about your technologies that you mentioned regarding the companies or the part of the ecosystem, not the farmers, but the other parts. I think the technology that you're providing is quite user friendly, and they will be able to integrate the Sensa provided technologies with their already functional technologies or other processes that they are going through. And the third and the most important regarding the farmers, you have correctly mentioned that the use of phones or other applications is not difficult for them because they're already doing it. The only challenge is here getting on ground with them, understanding what their challenges are, and then providing them with the proper skill set and gaining their trust. That's absolutely right that you have pointed out, because I understand that there have been a bombardment of technologies on the farmers. It becomes difficult on their level which one to choose from.
Absolutely.
So here, I think with previous experiences in the home country and then providing the same technology successful stories to them in the African market, because I think Indian and African market is not that different from
Absolutely.
each other. Some of the processes are similar at both the places. So I think it's a good thing that you are providing such a great technology which would be beneficial for all these parts of the ecosystem. So, which brings me to my final question, Avinash. What are you aiming? Because you're a strategic partner at Africa Agri Expo. So,
Yeah.
what are you aiming to achieve through attending this event, and what connections are important for you to build at Africa Agri Expo, which is in Kenya in February?
Sure. I think the answer to this comes from what you just said as well, right? We believe that India and Africa have very similar set of challenges, and at the same time, a similar potential to really become powerhouses in the area of growing and producing food, which can serve a lot of the other countries as well, right? And therefore, it's important that the problem statements which we look at in solving for India is something which we help and we work with the African ecosystem also to be able to jointly help solve similar sets of issues there as well. We see a huge potential, I think, across different communities and ecosystems in Africa for various sets of products as well, right? I think whether it's with the farm network, again, all these ecosystem players, whether it's on the farming, it's on the manufacturing, whether it's on the distribution, and the consumers themselves as well, right? I think it's a significant continent from consumption as well as production footprint of food. And so I think we would love to use this opportunity to help propagate not just Sensa's technology, but a little bit broader in terms of WayCool's operating model as well, and try and see how we could work with all these partners whom we hoped to be linked to, attached to through the expo, and work with them in terms of utilizing both WayCool's operating model and Sensa's technology with the necessary, of course, configurations and changes specific to the African markets, and go about a similar process, right? And if India and Africa can together solve on at least on the food wastage part significantly, I think it brings about it will at least help solve about 5 to 10% of the overall food transactions in the world, and that's the critical mass which we are looking at for the entire world to start relooking at how they would run food supply chains from a as I said, moving from a supply driven to a demand driven model. So to be able to achieve that, Sensa and WayCool's operating model requires that critical mass. It requires audience with the potential, with the understanding and the maturity to be able, and the willingness to be able to experiment with these models. And that's exactly where we felt that Africa was a very sweet spot for us. And the expo being the largest expo in Africa Agri Expo being the largest expo in Africa, we wanted to use this as the opportunity where we introduce Sensa to the African food and agri ecosystem itself. And we hope that this will be the start of a very long journey where together India and Africa relook at how food is grown, consumed, processed, and consumed in the world.
Absolutely. I'm sure that the audience that we're expecting at Africa Agri Expo would be able to help you to propagate the module that you're talking about. And there would not only be the companies, but also the policymakers who can, further help you in gaining trust of the farmers and all the parts of the ecosystem, I believe so. So with this, I think we have come to the end of our interview. Thank you so much, Avinash, for taking out time and sharing about Sensa and what are your strategies technologies next in the upcoming years. And I hope you will have an immersive experience at the expo, and I wish you success there.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Afsheen. Really looking forward to meeting you all at the expo and really gaining from it. Thank you. See you all
Likewise.
there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.